Trump's chances of winning the presidency have skyrocketed after his attempted assassination. President Trump was already heavily favored to win the election before the assassination, polling 1.9 points ahead of Joe Biden on FiveThirtyEight's polling aggregate. Furthermore, on Polymarket, Trump now enjoys a 71% chance of winning the election. Although he was already favored before the assassination, after the attempted assassination, his chances skyrocketed from 60% to now more than 70%. But what exactly is President Trump's ceiling in this election? In today's video, we'll find out. Now let's start filling in the Electoral College Map. Let's start filling in the Electoral College Map. Starting with the safe states for Donald Trump, President Trump will carry the states of Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Montana, Nebraska's at-large vote, the 1st District and 3rd District of the state, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, and Missouri. Those were all states that President Trump carried by safe margins back in 2020. Additionally, he will carry the states of Alaska, South Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa by safe margins, states that voted for him by at least 8 points back in 2020, and states I expect will go to him by at least 12 in 2024. In a best-case scenario, he will also easily carry the state of Florida. Now, in the state of Florida, what we see is that Donald Trump won the state over Joe Biden by 3.3 points back in 2020. Although it may seem like a narrow margin for people who are not familiar with politics, Florida is always one of the closest states in a presidential election. Trump was expected to lose the state, but he ended up winning the state by more than 370,000 votes. He also did very well with the trends. Miami-Dade County, the largest county in the state, the most populated county in the state, shifted 22 points towards him in the 2020 election, despite doing slightly worse in the general popular vote than what he did back in 2016. Furthermore, Republicans did very well in the state of Florida back in 2022. Senate candidate Marco Rubio easily won re-election by 17 points, while Governor Ron DeSantis prevailed by an even larger 20 points against a former governor in the state who was running as a Democrat. Therefore, Florida is easily in the Trump column. Additionally, what we are seeing here in the state of Texas is that this is also not a competitive state, at least in 2024. Governor Greg Abbott ran against a supposedly strong Democrat, Beto O'Rourke, and O'Rourke lost that race by more than 10 points as a supposedly strong candidate. Again, Democrats have lost significant support with Hispanic voters, especially in the state of Texas, where Republicans gained about 55 points of ground in one specific county, the county of Starr County. And although Democrats did have gains in some of the suburbs, the more populated counties in the state, what we generally see was that Trump did not do quite as poorly in the state as what many people had expected. He did quite well, and in 2024, again, tides have turned on Joe Biden. The election does not look good for him, and in the best case scenario, Trump easily carries the state by a safe margin. Now, going to Joe Biden's safe states, in the best case scenario, his safe states would be California here, DC, Maryland, Vermont, Massachusetts, and I believe those, and as well as that, the state of Hawaii, and I believe those are the only safe states for President Biden. Now, I'm going to get rid of some of the likely states here: Rhode Island, Delaware, Connecticut, Oregon, Washington, all obviously likely states for Joe Biden, as well as Illinois. Maine's 1st District, obviously also a likely district. All these states could easily go under 12% in a best case scenario, but I'm not inclined to believe that Donald Trump would actually flip those states over Joe Biden. I do want to mention the state of New York, though. Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul of the state of New York nearly lost a re-election to Republican Lee Zeldin, who was someone who denied the 2020 election's outcome. Despite that, because law and order had been a significant issue during the campaign, Zeldin came within 7 points of Kathy Hochul by doing very well in Suffolk County as well as Nassau County, essentially the greater New York area, especially in Long Island. Although I believe that the demographics have fundamentally shifted in New York, I'm still going to give it to Joe Biden by a likely margin. Now, the final state I have for Joe Biden in the likely margin is not the state of New Jersey. rather the state of Colorado, just because how much the state has shifted towards the Democratic Party over the past several decades makes me inclined to believe that some of the suburbs around the state have fundamentally shifted too far to the Democratic Party for the Republicans to make a significant reversal in those areas. Now going to some of the lean states for Biden here, I'm just going to get them covered right now. The one lean state I'm going to get covered right now is New Jersey. Right, the safe blue state of New Jersey, a state that voted for President Biden in 2020 by a margin of 16% over Donald Trump. But why? There are several reasons for that characterization. First up, Democratic Governor Phil Murphy in 2021, despite facing essentially no real opposition, nearly lost to Republican Jack Ciattarelli. The race was within 3.2%, and polling pundits had suggested by 80% of the votes in, the vote essentially looked like a tie, and this was a very competitive race, in a race that should have been solidly in the Democrats' column. Furthermore, Democrats lost several prominent members in the state Senate. The second-ranking Democrat in the state Senate here, Sweeney, actually came close to losing re-election. That's right, the safe blue state of New Jersey is now only in the lean Democratic characterization. But why? There are several reasons for this characterization here. New Jersey, although a state that voted for Joe Biden by 16%, is definitely still within the competitive range in a best-case scenario. Democrat Phil Murphy only won the state by 3.2% against Jack Ciattarelli in the governor's race back in 2021, despite the fact that Republicans had absolutely no hope of winning this race. Furthermore, the second-ranking Democrat in the state Senate, Sweeney, actually lost his race, despite the fact that his Republican challenger only spent $75 in campaigning. $75. He had a Facebook page, and that was it. He spent $75 on a Facebook page, and he defeated the second most powerful Democrat in the state. And that's really telling. Furthermore, New Jersey, if you look at the polling, it's extremely competitive. Coefficient came up with a poll that suggested Trump was actually up in the state. Finally, if you look at Polymarket, Republicans say they have about a 20% chance of actually winning the state, which is really, really impressive. So right now, New Jersey is in the lean Democratic column in a best-case scenario. So what about some likely states for President Trump? Well, there are quite a few of them. First off, in the state of Nevada here. Nevada is definitely a state where I believe Democrats could certainly lose by quite a big margin. After all, if you look at the Nevada Senate race, Catherine Cortez Masto was the incumbent Democrat from the state of Nevada in 2022. She was in a fight for her life, more than any other Democrat in the entire Senate. Democrats actually flipped the seat while retained all of their seats in a surprisingly good year for them, but Catherine Cortez Masto was the only Democrat that nearly lost. Furthermore, in the governor's race in 2022, the only governor's race that flipped from Democrat to Republican was the state of Nevada. Nevada is heavily trending towards the Republican Party, and therefore right now, Nevada is in the likely Republican column. Now, the state of Arizona, I also believe could be in the likely Republican column in a best-case scenario. First off, let's go to polling in the state of Arizona. Arizona is heavily favorable right now to Donald Trump. He leads by 4 points in the state, and if you look at the Decision Desk HQ/the Host polling, Trump is actually up in that aggregate by 8 percentage points. Now, the state of Arizona is very much in play for the Republican Party because of one thing. Joe Biden only won the state by 10,000 votes back in 2020. This was a very competitive race. Ultimately, Democrats saw major gains in Phoenix and Pima counties. Despite the fact they lost support in the rural areas, those two counties combined for about 80% of the state's population, which is why Democrats won, because they did well in both those counties. However, something might be changing. A lot of Hispanics live in, for example, Pima County and Maricopa County. Democrats have seen double-digit drop-offs since 2020 among those groups of voters, and as a result, Democrats could see significant drop-offs in the state of Arizona. Additionally, what we saw was the most Hispanic county of the state, Santa Cruz County, a traditionally heavily Democratic county, shifted 12 points in favor of the Republican Party back in 2020. So those are warning signs for Joe Biden, the fact that he's doing so poorly with these Hispanic voters. So Arizona right now in the best case scenario, likely for Donald Trump. Now going to the state of Georgia. Georgia also in terms of polling has been brutal for the Republican Party. Brutal for the Democratic Party, sorry. In the state of Georgia here, we've consistently seen President Trump hold about a 5% lead over Joe Biden. And mind you, that was before the assassination attempt. After that, it's only going to skyrocket, right? There's a lot of voters in the state of Georgia that are very reluctant to vote for the Democratic Party, that held their nose, voted for Biden in 2020, who really regret that decision. Black voters are an essential part of the Democratic coalition of the state of Georgia. Currently in polling, Democrats have seen about a 20% reduction in support among black voters, which is essentially how Democrats won the state of Georgia. They had huge black turnout in Atlanta. And they're not going to see that when we're seeing the fact that many black voters are disengaged in the democratic process of voting. And essentially, if they don't vote, Democrats are pretty screwed across the state. What we see in the governor's race back in 2022 was that Republicans were absolutely capable of winning the state of Georgia. Brian Kemp, the Republican governor, won by 7.5% against Democrat Stacey Abrams, who was supposed to be, again, the vote driver. Does that necessarily mean Stacey Abrams was a weak candidate? Maybe not necessarily, but the fact was Republicans are definitely capable of winning the state of Georgia. So therefore, in this scenario, in the best case, definitely likely for Donald Trump. He's already up to 251 Electoral College votes, and there's so many other states to go through. Now going to the state of North Carolina. North Carolina in polling, again, absolutely brutal for the Democratic Party. We're talking about a margin of that is outside the margin of error, 5.9%. The state has not been within the margin of error since the polling aggregate started back in March 1st. Essentially, Trump has consistently been leading. Even the Democratic interns showed the fact that Trump is leading the state. He won it in 2020. Essentially, Trump has not lost much support since 2020. He may have lost a few supporters due to Jan 6, but Biden has lost a heck of a lot of supporters, especially in the rural areas of the state. We're talking about rural black voters. Those were voters that held their nose, voted for Biden in 2020, really disengaged with Biden in 2024. Many of these disaffected black voters are really considering to vote for Donald Trump. We see that in personal anecdotes posted by different news sources. That includes both liberal and conservative sources, liberal sources such as the New York Times and conservative sources like Fox News. And we're also seeing the fact that many rural white voters are shifting towards the Republican Party. They're becoming more engaged in the voting process. Some of them didn't vote, but in this election, after seeing Trump's attempted assassination, that would really help drive a lot of Republican voters out. And again, don't discount Biden yet. He could still win the election. But right now, in the best case scenario, North Carolina definitely likely for the Republican Party. Another likely state for the Republican Party here is the state of Wisconsin. Democrats have very little room to blunder in the state of Wisconsin. They won the state by 20,000 votes over the Republican Party back in 2024. Again, this was an exceptionally close race. Polling in the state had Joe Biden up 8 points against Donald Trump, while now the tides again have shifted in the state of Wisconsin. In the state of Wisconsin right now, Trump actually has a lead. If the polls were as wrong as they were in 2016 or 2020, then Trump would be heading for a 7 to 8% win in the state. I doubt that's likely, but in the best case scenario, that is certainly extremely possible. Republicans have certainly not hit their ceiling in the state of Wisconsin in some of the rural areas, especially in this Ron Kynes district. This was previously heavily working class, heavily Democratic area. Now it's much more of a competitive, even Republican-leaning area of the state, and therefore really Republicans have a lot of opportunity in Wisconsin. In the best case scenario, definitely likely for Donald Trump, putting him up to 277 Electoral College votes in this scenario. I also forgot about Maine's 2nd district. Polling shows Trump up in that district by about 13% on the aggregate, and he'll definitely win it by a safe margin in 2024. Next up, in the state of Pennsylvania. President Trump was shot in this exact state, in Butler, Pennsylvania, where a lot of voters will likely feel sympathetic for the former president. That's right, the shooting happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, which is about 35 miles north of Pittsburgh. Again, voters who have witnessed that horrific shooting are very likely to be sympathetic for the former president, as again, most people would feel that regardless of your political opinion, that a presidential candidate should not be attempted to be assassinated. Even before, again, this attempted assassination, Biden was polling pretty bad in the state of Pennsylvania, as he was down by 3%, the most of any of the 3 Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. What we also see in this election is the fact that Joe Biden really doesn't have as strong of an argument that he was born in Lackawanna County. That is where Scranton is, Scranton Joe, so to speak. That was a message that he ran on, and that was a message that helped him in many of the suburban areas around Philadelphia, specifically in Chester County, Delaware County, and to some extent in somewhere like Lackawanna County, where Joe Biden was essentially born in. However, this election, again, he can't really use that argument as much, as because Democrats have such a little an area for a margin of error. I do certainly believe at this point that Trump is heavily favored, even in a generic general election, and in the best case scenario, he could easily win the state by a likely margin. Now we go to the final few states, and I'm just going to go with it in geographical order, starting with the state of New Mexico. New Mexico did see a competitive governor's race back in 2022. Michelle Lujan Grisham only won by 6% against Mark Ronchetti. However, Ronchetti is relatively a strong candidate. I don't think Trump is as strong of a candidate against Biden in the state of New Mexico. However, again, it is a border state. It's a state where illegal immigration could be affecting a lot of voters. In a best case scenario, you can certainly make the argument that Trump would win the state. There's a lot of Hispanic voters in the state. About a third of the state's population is Hispanic, and those voters have been heavily disaffected by the Democratic Party. Those are the type of voters that Republicans are trying to pick up. Although Democrats are still going to win the Hispanic vote, not by as much of a margin as they did in 2020, that could be critical to Democrats in New Mexico. And again, many of these rural areas, this is about oil country, coal country. These are all factors that could benefit Donald Trump in the state of New Mexico. However, again, 11-point shift for Trump to win. Is Trump going to get 11% overperformance? I really do doubt it. Again, it could be possible, but polling again in the state is not super favorable for the Republican Party. New Mexico is tilt for the Democratic Party at this moment in time. Now going to Minnesota. Minnesota is a state where, again, what we see was that in 2020, Democrats had a pretty good performance there compared to the rest of the Rust Belt. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, largely thanks to Black Lives Matter movement in the state. Now again, Minneapolis is very progressive. It nearly voted to remove the police department, which is again virtually unheard of. Republicans have actually done very well in the rural areas. Democrats held a Republican district right here and another district right here. Again, you see this area of the state, right? This is heavily Republican area. Democrats previously actually held those type of districts, or Republicans actually held 2 districts around the Minneapolis suburbs. Now again, Democrats have saw significant overperformances in around the Minneapolis region, but Republicans have seen significant gains in the rural areas. When you equate it all out, Democrats are still gaining a bit more ground than the Republican Party. And in this state, again, a state that has voted for the Democratic Party consistently for like the last 4 decades, even Ronald Reagan was not able to win the state against Walter Mondale back in 1984. It does certainly have the longest Democratic voting history of any state. Nevertheless, here in the best case scenario, 7-point margin, it's difficult to overcome, but the rural areas, they're not maxed out for Trump. You could see a lot of this area around the Minneapolis area in the exurbs not actually shift towards the Democrats and actually shift towards the Republicans. All things considered, Minnesota could be a tilt red state. It's a bit of a stretch, but in the best case scenario, it certainly could be. Now, Nebraska second, I'm going to get it out of the way. It was a district that Biden won by 6. It is heavily trending blue, which again are beneficial factors for the Democrats. But again, this district has been redistricted to be slightly more conservative. It's still a district that Biden won by like 4 to 5. But I think in the best case scenario, indisputably, Nebraska second could go for the Republican Party. Now going to Michigan. Michigan, there's a big problem for Democrats in Michigan. Democrats won Michigan because they did very well around the Wayne County area, Washington County, Oakland County, right? These are heavily Arab American areas. Detroit has the heaviest Arab American population of any city in the United States. That's the indisputable fact. And what essentially we're seeing is because of the Israel-Hamas war, many Arab American voters in Detroit are choosing to support Palestine. And they're very disaffected with what Democrats are doing with the Israel-Hamas war. And if turnout is down in Detroit, which it was back in 2016, that's why Hillary Clinton lost the state. She didn't do that poorly. Had Detroit really saw the turnout that she was expecting, she would have won. But again, turnout was very low in Detroit. It was also low in Ann Arbor. and she didn't do that well in Oakland County, and that's why Joe Biden was able to win in 2020, but Hillary Clinton lost in 2016. And again, those disaffected Democratic voters could be a huge problem for Democrats in 2024 in the state of Michigan. After all, again, the margin of error for Democrats in Michigan isn't that great. In the best case scenario, Trump would definitely end up winning the state. Right now, I'd say by a lean margin, it could be likely, but right now I'm just going to be safe and put it as lean. Also, if you look at the state of Michigan in polling, which I kind of missed, it does have a pretty comprehensive polling aggregate. Trump is also up. Again, Joe Biden in 2020 was up by a significant margin in Michigan, by 8%. He underperformed by 5%. So it's definitely plausible that Trump ends up winning the state by about 5 points, if not a bit more than that. Now going to the next state here, the state of Virginia. Virginia is very interesting. It's a state that voted for Biden by 10. I'm just going to pull it up here. So in the state of Virginia, back in 2020, Biden won the state by double digits. Democrats did very well in the state back in 2020 because Democrats did well in Fairfax County, as well as some of the suburbs, those kind of swing counties, Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, right? These are areas that traditionally vote Republican that voted for Joe Biden. However, when we see some of the other signs, it could be a bit more concerning for the Democratic Party. For one, when we're looking at some of these polls here, Democrats are not leading by these huge margins. Now, the most recent poll was done by On Point Politics as a sponsor. I'm not going to really look at that right now. Again, I don't want these YouTuber-sponsored polls, although they could give you a very excellent glimpse into the general image. I want to look at some of the other polls. Essentially, what we're seeing is that this election is closer in Virginia. Although Trump has not been leading in many of these polls, in fact, only a few polls show Trump is leading, if at all they show that. But again, a 2 to 3% margin of victory for Biden is nothing to brag about in the state of Virginia. He won the state by 10 points in 2020, and that's a big problem. Trump has made significant inroads in the rural areas. For example, I'm just going to take Allegheny County. It was a county that voted for Romney by 3. Trump won the county by 44 points over Joe Biden. And again, he's able to run up those numbers in the rural areas, and if he can keep those numbers down in Fairfax, in Loudoun County, perhaps he could win the state. Right now, I'll be cautious. I'll give it to Biden by a tilt margin, but it could certainly happen. Now going to the state of New Hampshire. In the state of New Hampshire in 2020, Biden won the state by 7, which sounds pretty impressive. After all, it's a state with a lot of white college-educated voters, the group of voters that are most reluctant to support Donald Trump. However, again, the state is very rural, and some of these areas could turn on Joe Biden after the fact that he kind of dropped out of the Democratic primary in the state of New Hampshire. Again, New Hampshire is a state that is a quote-unquote live free or die state, and that's a problem for Joe Biden, right? Gas prices are up, a lot of problems occurred in New Hampshire that are associated with Biden, and again, the state of New Hampshire in terms of politics is extremely volatile. Therefore, at this point in time, I could still give the state to Donald Trump in a best case scenario. Now going to the state of Maine. Maine is actually a state I believe many political YouTubers overlook as a potential flip for Donald Trump. Again, potential. Not likely at this point, but in the best case, certainly possible. We've seen polls in the state of Maine. And except this poll that was conducted in 2022 before the general election, Joe Biden was doing extremely poorly after that, right? Biden +1, Trump +5. Trump +1, Biden +2. Again, these are razor-thin margins. And Joe Biden only won the state by 9, not to mention the fact that this state is extremely rural. Obama only lost one county in the state back in 2012. Joe Biden lost half the counties in the state. In short, Portland has trended heavily towards the Democratic Party, and that's like the vote-producing county of the state. But at the end of the day, the state of Maine could certainly be competitive. I'm not buying the fact that Republicans are favored right now, but in the best-case scenario, it could certainly go to the Republican Party. And that sums it up. 209 for Biden, 329 for Trump. In summary, the assassination attempt on President Donald Trump has greatly impacted this election in favor of him. After all, a lot of voters are going to feel sympathetic to Donald Trump because of this assassination attempt. Although this is a best case scenario, the fact is Democrats are doing miserably across the board. New Jersey is a lean state. New Mexico is a tilt state. Virginia is a tilt state for them. Again, we look at Maine's at-large vote. That's a lean state for the Republican Party. We go to Nebraska second. That's a lean state or lean district for them as well. So what we're seeing is, again, a pretty bad map for the Democratic Party. Democrats generally have about a 200 floor in the election and the Electoral College Map. The fact is, they're not even at 210 right now, and that's a big concern for the Democratic Party right now. Joe Biden needs to address the problems with his age, mental acuity, and etc. The issues of like the Israel-Hamas war, inflation, and the border crisis have certainly significantly hindered Biden's campaign. 75% of voters believe Biden don't have the mental acuity to serve as president effectively. 70% of people straight up believe that Biden is way too old to be president. Biden needs to address those problems to have any chance of winning the election in a realistic scenario. Everything's going wrong for him in this election. Everything went right for him in 2020, and he barely won the Electoral College and the popular vote. So thank you for watching today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. My actual election prediction posted just yesterday is right here. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.